Speaker today is Chirag Jog, CTO Clogeny, and he has a very interesting topic on which a lot of attendees in our conferences were asking about. This topic is federated clouds, the future of cloud computing for enterprises. Just like to welcome Chirag.
Uh, my name is Chirag Zog. The topic that I'm talking on today is about federated clouds, the future of cloud computing in enterprises. So we had a session yesterday that talked about federated clouds at a high level, what all it implies and the things that a federated cloud means. My session will mostly be covering the lower level details, how you probably can go around designing a federated cloud or what all entities are involved while building a federated cloud. Yeah, so the agenda today is we'll cover cloud services in a snapshot, the economic theory behind why federated clouds are important or what is the rationale behind it, understanding cloud federation, an example of a federated multi-tier application that we have worked on, and reference architecture of how one can go around to build a federated cloud environment in enterprise environments. So yeah, this is cloud services in a snapshot. I guess over the course of the last today and yesterday, everyone is pretty clear on these terms. But when an organization wants to adopt these services, like for example, they want to set up a private cloud using VMware, CloudStack, or when they want to use the public cloud like Amazon, or go even levels higher using PaaS or SaaS, there is a certain constraint that they have to overcome. And that constraint is basically vendor lock-in. So federated cloud federated cloud tries to kind of address this concern of vendor lock-in or the hold-up problem or underinvestment. So let's look at a bit of a detail of what vendor lock-in really means. So vendor lock-in is basically uncertainty about selecting and technology. Today, the cloud computing space, there is so much hype. There are so many startups. There are a lot of people talking about the cloud. There is a lot of, I would say, flux or chaos in the market. So there is a lot of confusion whether I should go and tie in with Amazon or whether I should go and tie in with Rackspace, or if I'm already married to Rackspace, can I move away to Amazon? So there is this concern about vendor lock-in or tie-in. I guess a couple of years back it was whether I should go and tie in with .NET or Java. Now it has moved to the cloud, whether I should tie in with Amazon or with a public cloud or the private cloud. Now in the cloud space also, as you go higher in the stack, like when you go from the infrastructure as a service to a private platform as a service, the vendor lock-in increases. When you go to software as a service level, the vendor lock-in is even more higher. So as the slide says, when you have a platform as a service, like Google App Engine or Force.com, you have a high vendor lock-in, which means that moving away from that vendor is tough, or you'll have to spend additional money doing so. While when you're at a lower level, using infrastructure service providers like Amazon, Rackspace, the vendor lock-in is relatively less, and moving away or changing a vendor is relatively easy, although it doesn't completely go away. So this leads to the consequence that users have to depend on the business strategy of the service provider. Like tomorrow if Amazon says, I'm going to increase the price by 10 cents and you're tied in, you can't do anything about it, you're stuck. You can't move out, you can't say, okay, I'm going to stop using this and I'm going to do something else. So that's the next question that comes in, which is about the hold-up problem. The hold-up problem is, in terms of economics, is the bargaining power has shifted from the customer to the provider. So with vendor lock-in, what happens is you're tied in, you're there, and you can't move out. The customer kind of has a monopoly over you. He kind of has a high lock-in with you, and because of that, he can kind of provide you suboptimal conditions, and you can't escape without spending a lot of money. So an example of a situation where the hold-up problem is high is, as I say, is a closed environment or a closed platform as a service environment, where like Force.com or Google App Engine or Wolf platform, where you're heavily tied into it, you can't do anything about it if you want to move out. So this is the kind of the problem that a federated cloud tries to solve, where for a given organization or an enterprise, you can choose your vendor or you can move across vendors seamlessly without having to worry about how much it's going to cost me or how the economy is going to work. Today in the market, this is still in theory. There is no real federated cloud solution available to let you do this. And as you go higher in the stack, as I said, the challenge becomes even more tougher. So, I mean, this presentation is kind of a design of how it can happen, and when it happens, probably after 3-4 years, this design could be used then. So yeah, I mean, so what is the motivation for Cloud Federation? One is no vendor lock-in. I mean, no is a star because there'll always be some lock-in. So you can reduce the lock-in, but it's very difficult to eliminate the lock-in. If you want to eliminate the lock-in, then it's kind of, you're not leveraging that cloud service to its fullest. Second is, the motivation is multitude of players. You don't want monopoly of a particular company or a particular group of companies or a consortium. You want to be, your organization or your group should be able to choose across different vendors. Heterogeneity of cloud platforms. You want to deploy a .NET application, you want to deploy a Java application, you want to deploy open source, Python, PHP, you should be able to do that without having to worry whom you are dealing with. Interoperability and portability. So today, say you have your application that's deployed in, say, Amazon or your private cloud, and tomorrow you want to move it to some other cloud, say a public cloud, or you want to move it from Amazon to Terramark or Azure. You should be able to do that easily without having to worry about the internals or how it happens. The last point is geographical distribution. Sometimes you have your application stack set up for the, say, for the US region. Your company enters a new market, the European region, which has certain laws or certain restrictions, which impose that the data should not move out and things like that. So you should be able to seamlessly migrate or import the whole application from the US region to the EU region or some other, or the Asia region seamlessly. So yeah, I mean, now we understand what federated cloud is. What are the design considerations while we go to design such a cloud which can provide us with a unified access? So one of the main things is resource migration. When I decide that I want to stop using this provider, or when my company decides that it wants a higher SLA or it wants lower cost, how easy or how difficult is it to migrate my resources, compute, network, storage, or other thing, policies, or identities from one provider to another provider. Second consideration is resource redundancy. Can I design applications that are highly redundant, in the sense that, say I have an application that serves a lot of, it's highly tolerant, which means that no matter how much load is there, I can still, it can still take the load, but can the provider below it take that load? For example, last year we saw that Amazon was down for a certain amount of time, which led to companies like Foursquare and these people going down. But there were some startups that use Amazon, but they were still up and running. That is because probably they designed their systems better, or they were dependent on multiple clouds. They were successful in failing over from Amazon to another cloud like Rackspace easily and seamlessly. So how can you provide resource redundancy? And third is how can you provide a combination of complementary resources and services? Say you like something from Rackspace, you like something from GoGrid, you like something from Amazon, and how can I build a system that can use X, Y, and Z from this without having to buy everything from Amazon? Can I design a system like that? So yeah, I mean, to go a bit deeper into the redundancy versus migration issue, what do you mean by redundancy and what do you mean by migration? So redundancy is when you have a set of things running. It's like RAID. I mean, if everyone knows about RAID, that's redundant, right? You have storage, it's striped across, it's duplicated, it's there. One copy goes, you have another copy. Your data is secure. But that doesn't mean that while you're in production, all the copies of data are being used. They're redundant, they're just there. So as the definition says, it's a subset of service offering that provide a better utility to a client than a single offering or a single thing. So for example, Amazon S3 has 3 copies of your data spread across multiple regions. So but you may never use those 2 other copies. You may always use only 1 copy, but they are being redundant for you. Second is migration. Now, migration can be determined by policies like a new service offering offers better utility to a customer than the previous one. So, for example, your service provider does not provide enough SLAs, or some other company does provide more SLAs. You want to move everything there. So migration is that. So coming to resource, going a bit more deeper into resource redundancy. Now in cloud computing, there are compute resources you have to worry about. There are storage resources you have to worry about. The other 2 main resources. Networking can be recreated or is kind of limited by what your provider can give you. So what are the different types of redundancy that you can achieve for your compute resources. So one is redundant deployment, which means that the application logic is deployed to different providers. So say you have an Amazon, you have a private cloud, say Citrix Cloud Stack, your application logic, everything is pushed to both the environments, but only one is serving the request. The other one is just for failover. It's like in a active state. So once your main thing goes down, it will fail over to the second thing that is running. So this is like increase the availability while decreasing the provider dependence. You have the same application stack, your same application package running on multiple services. Availability may be one reason. There may be other reasons, like we saw one would be customer proximity. Your same product, you want to service different customers in different geographies, you want to do that. Compliance with regulations, as we saw, that in EU or in some other regions, data should not move out, move around. And the last is redundant deployment should lead to automatic failover, which means that your services should determine that once something is down, it should seamlessly move to the next deployed service. So here's an example that we have. This is showing that the same application is deployed on Amazon as well as CloudStack. So CloudStack is a private cloud in your environment, and Amazon is, as you all know, public cloud. So over here it shows that the load balancers, the application servers, here you have your database as the master and slave, and the redundant environment over there has the slave database only running, and both of them are taking snapshots on their own. So when there is a problem in the Amazon server, like say someone is there to determine it, it will fail over to the CloudStack environment, and the slave DB over there becomes the master. The load balancers, then the DNS gets redirected to the new load balancers, and everyone, and the CloudStack then becomes the main provider, the main service. So this kind of failover, this kind of redundancy in a federated cloud should be or would be probably built in. The next kind of redundancy is resource redundancy. In this redundancy, what happens is that there are multiple deployments, but all of them are serving traffic so that you have better performance. So you have your Amazon instance and your CloudStack instance have a common load balancer where the load is shared across everyone. So as the definition says that each request is processed by more than one instance. This improves the performance by reducing the risk of the instance failing, right? So what will happen over here is even if something goes down, there's still someone up there. There's no failover time, there's no failover overhead, everything is running as is. There's a diagram that explains this also. The third kind of redundancy is parallel computation. So if people have heard about big data, Hadoop, this is where that comes in, where you distribute the load, distribute the computations across multiple machines, multiple nodes to do the calculation. So this is an example that I've taken from the RightScale website. This kind of shows of how you can have redundancy that is active, which means both of them are serving traffic. So you have your site at the top, you have two load balancers, and then each of them are pointing to the applications in their zone or their cloud, and they are pointing to applications in the other cloud as well. So this kind of diagram will help you achieve that kind of redundancy. And then all of these applications talk to the same database master, which is again replicating data to a slave. So this example shows two zones of Amazon, but this can be easily replaced by another cloud or by a private cloud or anything. Right. So now the examples that we saw about resource redundancy were at the IaaS level, that was at the infrastructure level, at the lowest level of computation that we receive. As we go higher up in the stack, like as we go from IaaS to PaaS and to SaaS, it gets more tougher to provide this kind of redundancy, because, for example, say you are, so let's take the example of PaaS over here, right? Each of them have their own programming models, each of them have their own SDKs. So if you're developing an application specifically for Google App Engine, your Eclipse or your developer environment has to contain those libraries, those files, and you will build your application using that. So how can you provide a similar environment like Google App Engine? You can't, it's tough. Or if you will, there'll be two types of applications, two versions of applications doing the same thing. So you'll have to kind of have two versions. One runs on Google App Engine, one say runs on Amazon EC2, and so Google App Engine has its own database structure, it has its own object relation mapper, Amazon, you can use whatever you want. So you'll be changing layers of your application, but you'll achieve the redundancy. Similarly, Force.com has their own development environment, their own language also. There's no Java or Python on which you can develop in. So to solve this problem at a higher level, at the PaaS level, there are open source PaaS that have come out. One is VMware's Cloud Foundry and Red Hat's OpenShift. So what this lets you do is you can have VMware Cloud Foundry running on your public cloud, you can have VMware Cloud Foundry running on your private cloud, and they can still host the same application, recreate the same environment with each other. So this helps you do that. Now as we go even higher, to the highest level, that is software as a service, here it is very cost prohibitive to kind of come up with a thing that can mimic a SaaS application. So an example of a SaaS application would be, say, your Google Mail, or here I've taken an example of Salesforce. You can't provide a redundant service for Salesforce. That would be like building a product on its own. So because they have proprietary formats, they have their own APIs, they don't have a hosted version and a private version. They just have one version of it. So as we have gone higher, it's impossible to isolate smaller building blocks to build a competing solution. Now, there is no competing solution, right? Because Salesforce, their data formats, their APIs, no one else can read them, understand them, do anything with them. It's proprietary. Similar with, say, Google Mail. You can't have, say, my Google Mail stops working. I can't switch over to something else. It's down, it's down. You can't do anything about it. The next challenge, the first challenge that we saw was about redundancy. The next challenge is about migration. How do you migrate, or what entails in migrating resources from one provider to another provider? So if the first is, so there are different kinds of migration strategies that are there. One is shadowed and redundant migration. Similarly, so when we talk at the infrastructure as a service level, migrating between clouds or migrating from private environments to the cloud is a challenge because everyone has a different hypervisor layer, or a virtualization layer is different. So there are very few companies that exist today that can actually capture your servers from private and physical machines, move them to the cloud, or move them from Rackspace to Amazon. They exist, but there are like probably 2 or 3 companies that can do that seamlessly across all platforms. So using their services in building some kind of solution like this. So an example over here is from one of these companies known as Rasemi, which so they have something known as C2C and C2V. So C2V is cloud to cloud, and C2V is cloud to virtual, and P2C is private to the cloud or physical to the cloud. So as you can see, one of the solutions is they can migrate servers across the board, from private to public, across public, from virtualized environments like pure native Xen hypervisor, Hyper-V ESX servers to the cloud. Or even from physical boxes. You have your physical Linux box running, they can migrate it to the cloud. So this is one of the aspects that has to be built in as part of this federated cloud service. So this is an example of how a federated IaaS environment can look like. So on the left hand side, you will have, say, this is your private data center. You will have a firewall, you will have a load balancer, you will have, say, so I've taken an example of a pet store, which is a standard Java application available on the net. So they have a web server, an application server, database server, the standard Java stack. And then on the right hand side, it's the remote cloud data center. It can be Amazon, it can be Google, it can be whatever. And there again, we have kind of replicated the whole thing, but to ensure that everyone is talking to the same network or everyone is bound to the same network, there is a VPN appliance that, so there's a VPN appliance and there is an encrypted tunnel that ensures that the entities that are on the cloud or that are on the remote cloud also feel that they are part of this primary data center. So to achieve that, at all of these levels, we have a VPN appliance. So today the solution that is being used or being built is using OpenVPN. But this essentially what this does is, it allows an encrypted tunnel to exist between the two. It allows all the VLANs or all the private networks to be recreated in the cloud. so that everyone can talk to each other, assuming that they're on the same network. So yeah, I mean, these were the what we can say, the requirements in defining, how a federated or how cloud federation or federated cloud should be. Now, once we understand the requirements, I think we should move on to seeing how we can go ahead and build one, or what all components are required in building one. So, towards the reference architecture, that's that, how do you build, or how do you at least come up with a reference architecture of building such a thing. So, what is the first and primary requirement of building such a system? Is either using an interoperable system, which means that the federated cloud solution you provide can work or works across compatible cloud management systems. So here I have taken an example of Eucalyptus, Amazon EC2, CloudStack, CloudBridge. Now all of these claim to work interoperably. All of them claim that the APIs talk the same language. So today, if my application or if my thing or if my tools depend on Amazon EC2, I was supposed to, if I'm supposed to replace them with Eucalyptus, they would work as it is. I mean, that's what the claim is. So either you build an interoperable system using compatible cloud management systems, or you rely on multi-cloud library tools. So for example, if you have an application that is, instead of talking to EC2 directly, or instead of talking to the APIs directly, what the application or tool should do is talk to a middle layer. And this middle layer will kind of give you a unified view of APIs and things like that. So for example, there are libraries like libcloud in Python, jcloud in Java, fog for Ruby, where you go to the library and just say create a server, and my provider is Amazon, which is configurable. It will go and create a server on Amazon. Tomorrow, if you just change that configurable item from say EC2 to Rackspace, nothing else changes. Your code doesn't change, nothing changes. It will go and deploy the same on Rackspace. So you use such kind of multi-cloud libraries to abstract away the complexities of the cloud from your application. You create that segregation. The next important thing, I mean, after the interoperable part, is actually building a provisioning engine. So this provisioning engine, I mean, this is probably the most complicated part, and it's probably 3-4 years ahead, I mean, before anyone actually starts selling this. But the challenge here is firstly discovering applications and packages and components that exist in a private environment. So today when you want to say build a federated cloud or federated environment, you already have a private cloud or private environment running. You'll have companies that have ESX servers, VMware servers, private clouds probably there. And you would want to seamlessly or as easily as possible discover these applications, discover these servers, build kind of a tool that can discover it, build a profile of all these applications, and then migrate or federate them across providers. So discovering application packages, discovering components, mapping the business components to pool of resources. So for example, you know that these are the bunch of servers that are there, and some admin tells you that these are the applications that are there running on them. How do you map what is running where your application server resides, what ports are they talking on, what kind of traffic is going on between them. Today, there are very few tools available that can do this, but hopefully in the future we'll have something like this that can do it. And based on this discovery, you build an application or a deployment descriptor, which can be used to create redundancy of these existing setups or migrate them to the cloud. So after the provisioning engine, the next thing is building a resource manager. So you have a provisioning engine that understands, okay, I have these servers, they have to be migrated, I'm ready to migrate. Now what do I do? So the resource manager is kind of someone who will manage all the cloud resources or all the federated resources in a unified way. It will use the cloud libraries that we spoke about and the elements that we spoke about to provide an abstraction of APIs and of the underlying services. And it also will let you configure resources using the multi-cloud library. So once you have your descriptors ready, and you know that I have to bring up 4 Linux machines and 5 Windows machines, and these Linux machines should be configured this way. They should have Apache running, they should have Tomcat, they should have XYZ running on it. The resource manager should understand or create configurations out of it and go and deploy them in these clouds. The next element is the deployment manager. So based on the description, then based on the resource management, the resource manager will go and deploy these resources for you in the cloud. But the deployment manager is kind of, once it's done, someone has to monitor everything. someone has to monitor and guarantee SLAs based on the policies that are set. So this deployment manager can guarantee the availability, the correctness of the system, because tools can fail, things can go wrong. You could have something non-standard in your private cloud that got migrated in the wrong way. Someone has to verify that correctness for everything, including the networks that are created, including the firewalls that are set up. So this deployment manager will kind of guarantee availability of applications as well as the correctness and the configuration of the provisioned resources. So it can provision, and another important thing that this tool or this thing should do, it should provide guarantees and SLAs. So when it will have, or it will talk to the monitoring system, like today there are a lot of solutions available in the market like Hyperic, Nagios. Okay, time is out. All right. So this deployment manager will kind of talk to these systems and provide guarantees and SLAs using monitoring. And then I'll just go through the final diagram. This is the diagram. So this is kind of the reference architecture for designing a federated cloud. You'll have your business logic, you'll have the provisioning engine, you will have all these managers that I just described. They will in turn talk to the resource manager, who will use multi-cloud libraries or common cloud standards, and then interact with cloud services and multiple cloud services and multiple storage gateways and things like that. So yeah, thank you.
Are there any questions? What you can take? You can just raise your hands up.
Yeah.
Here.
The entire solution, not yet.
Yeah, because I mean, we already have this and kind of the stacks that you already talked about in terms of interoperable clouds. We already have that solution. So
Correct. No, what I'm saying, the whole, I mean, there are pieces available, but the whole solution, I mean, the complete solution of being able to migrate things, networks and storage from your private cloud to your public cloud and federate them. Those pieces are, I mean, they're there, but they're not complete. I mean, they're still a way, I would say a couple of years ahead. I mean, before they are sold as a product, complete product. That is,
yeah, correct. It may not be sold as a product, but I mean, it's there. It's something that people are already doing.
they're doing, yeah, they're doing, but it's not seamless. I mean, it's not, as I said, it's not productized completely yet.
Yep.
So
So on behalf of UBM and Cloud Connect, we just like to hand over for the Thank you.
hey, thanks a lot. Hope to see you soon.
Yeah, I'll be in touch.